888-314-7884. Jimmy Akin is senior apologist here at Catholic Answers and the author of A Daily Defense, 365 Days Plus One to Becoming a Better Apologist. Hi, Jimmy. How are you?
I'm doing okay. How are you, Si?
I am very well now, and very happy
Good.
I get 2 hours with you
Likewise.
to start my new year. And today is the very last day for Catholic Answers to be a teenager.
That's right,
It's
because
Catholic Answers Live, I mean.
tomorrow is the 20th anniversary of the show.
Right, we're going to do the big 20th anniversary show. Surprise guests. I'm told there may be streamers. It's going to be, which makes great radio. Streamers really make for some great radio. So, how long you been at it? Out of these 20 years?
20. I was on show number 1.
You were in.
In fact, I'm the only person still on staff who was on show number 1.
Really?
Yeah.
Who else was on? Was there another? It was, well, first of all, it was only 1 hour at that time, right?
Correct.
You started doing a 1 hour show.
And going to 2 hours was my suggestion, incidentally.
And nicely done, Jimmy.
Thank you.
It's a
That
good
was-
suggestion. Could you suggest 3 hours? It's so much
I
fun
have
for me.
suggested.
Have you?
Yeah.
We could do another hour. What's up, Darren? Okay, Darren says, yeah. Okay, it's now a 3 hour show. Somebody tell EWTN, will you? That it's now a 3 hour show.
We may need to.
It
that.
needs more
Yeah.
deliberation than that?
Yeah.
Okay. And then, so you were on the first show, and when you first started 20 years ago, was it all open forum? Did you
No.
do theme shows? Did you?
We didn't have open forum yet. It wasn't yet invented.
Uh-huh.
We did invent it fairly quickly, but at the beginning, there wasn't always confidence that we would be able to have the breadth of knowledge needed to be able to do an open forum on just unrestricted topics. And some of the topics we originally had planned were like way too narrow. I remember that you could never get a productive hour of radio out of them. Like, I remember one of the early shows we had scheduled was an entire hour,
Yeah.
believe it or not, on the question of who can go to communion.
Oh, that is. Yeah.
And I think that
Was that on a fun Friday? Or?
I think that is was the show that when we actually got up to the time to do that show is like, this is never going to work. And I think that may have become the first open forum.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, it takes time to learn how to do this. And Catholic Answers started when nobody was doing it. I mean, there really weren't Catholic. But you were very familiar with Protestant.
Oh yeah,
Radio.
I was a jock on a country station when I was in high school.
Yeah, yeah. Protestant radio shows tended not to be an hour, though. Isn't
Oh
that the
yeah,
case?
no, that's true. A lot of Protestant radio shows, and I would listen after I became a Christian. I'd listen to a lot of Protestant radio, but they're frequently much shorter. Some of them on little bitty stations like the ones I listened to in Arkansas, they could be as short as 15 minutes or something. But most of them seem to be like 30 minutes. Few of them hour long,
Yeah.
but a lot of them were 30 minutes at the time. I'm not sure what it is these days, but you'd have a lot of like TV shows based on the preaching ministry of a particular preacher, and 30 minutes is a reasonable amount of preaching time
Yeah.
to build a show around.
Right.
But an hour is a little more challenging. So there were a lot of 30-minute shows.
888-318-7884, our number, 888-31-TRUTH, if you prefer it that way. It is open forum today on Catholic Answers Live. Catholic Answers' last day as a teenager. Tomorrow, the show turns 20. And all kinds of interesting, some surprise guests on tomorrow. Jimmy will be here again with us. Sorry to make you work in front of the microphone 2 days in a row. Jimmy,
Oh.
you going to be all right?
I like radio.
I know
It'll be
you
fine.
do. I know you do. Chris Check hosted yesterday while I was
Yeah.
out, and
How about that?
He left a cup of tea for me, but it was cold by the time I got to it. I probably should.
Dang, second law of thermodynamics.
I know. I am so tired of thermodynamics. I can't tell you. I just feel like I'm just melting to a state of entropy. I don't know.
I heard them summarized, like the 3 laws of thermodynamics. Once summarized is you can't. How did it go? I'm not sure I can remember all 3, but it's like you can't win, you can't break even, and you can't leave the game.
Very much like Las Vegas for some people.
Yeah.
Again, 888-318-7884. We have time before we have to take a break, so let's go to Ryan in Midland, Texas, listening on Guadalupe Radio. Ryan, thanks so much for calling. Your question for Jimmy Akin.
All right. My question is, given that Western rite of the church has different variations of the Mass, such as the Ambrosian Rite, the Mozarabic Rite, the Anglican use, the Dominican Rite, and etc., would it be possible for the Vatican to resurrect or bring back rites or uses of Mass that they haven't used in a long time, such as the Celtic Rite, the Durham Rite, the Uppsala use, the use of York, and so on, if people had enough interest in doing so?
Hypothetically, it's possible. I don't foresee it happening except in cases of where you have a group of people who have been outside of the Catholic Church who are coming back into union and want to retain elements of their prior heritage. And for most of those groups, you don't currently have groups of people outside of the church who are continuing to use most of those liturgical traditions. The other way that you could have something like that happen is during periods of liturgical renewal, in particular, or at the initiative of local bishops' conferences, you could have texts that are based on some older texts that the bishops want to retrieve these traditions and include them, but it wouldn't be a full resurrection of these older liturgical forms. It would just incorporate elements of them. We saw something like that happen after Vatican II, where there was a desire on the part of the Council to retrieve some older liturgical forms that had been used in the Church in previous centuries in different parts of the Christian world, and they ended up getting incorporated into the Mass in various ways. We got out of that, among other things, the exchange of the sign of peace, which is something that had not been part of the Western Rite previously. Also, we got things like the second through the fourth Eucharistic prayers contain elements from prior or other rite sources, but I don't foresee a bunch of people petitioning Rome. I mean, it could happen, but I don't foresee any likely scenario where a bunch of people say, hey, let's all start celebrating the Mass exactly the way it was celebrated by Celts in the 7th century. And Rome saying, yeah, okay. I can imagine scenarios where you have elements from that liturgical tradition being retrieved, but a full resurrection of the Mass of that time, given the fact you don't have anybody celebrating it that way today at all outside of the church, it doesn't create a plausible scenario for it coming back in its fullness.
Okay, Ryan?
Yeah, that helps nicely. Can I add just one other thing real fast?
Sure.
Okay, I'm curious. When I attended Youth 2000 last year, a seminarian friend of mine told me that the sacramentary is not supposed to be used to celebrate Mass anymore unless it's an emergency. If his understanding about this is correct, does that mean the only time the old Mass translation before 2011 can only be used again if it's an emergency, if the current Missal translation is just not available for some reason?
I see what you mean. So by this, when you refer to the sacramentary, you're referring to an edition of what's now commonly called the Roman Missal. But it had a different translation in English prior to 2010. And yeah, the pre-2010 translation is not to be used under ordinary circumstances. We're supposed to use the currently authorized translation.
Ryan, thank you very much for that call. It is open forum today on Catholic Answers Live. Jimmy Akin is our guest, and we'll be right back with more right after this.
Your number one source for Catholic apologetics and evangelization. Catholic Answers Live.
January is Pro-Life Month, and to get as many people as we can involved in the pro-life cause, we're making Trent Horn's DVD, Making the Case for Life, available for just $5 a copy. That's a savings of over 70%. This DVD was made specifically with you in mind, to help you engage in sustained and meaningful dialogue, and to give you the tools you need to change people's hearts and minds, so that together we might build up a pro-life culture, one person, one conversation at a time. To get your copy of the DVD, Making the Case for Life, for just $5 a copy, call 1-888-291-8000 or visit the shop at Catholic.com.
Did the Catholic Church add books to the Bible? Or did Protestants remove 7 books from the Old Testament? Why Catholic Bibles Are Bigger takes you on a fact-filled tour through the history of the Bible, revealing the whole story behind the lost books of the Protestant Old Testament. With the latest information and discourse on crucial issues, Why Catholic Bibles Are Bigger is a book that belongs in the library of every serious student of Scripture. And as a special bonus, if you order online, we'll add an ebook copy of 15 Myths, Mistakes, and Misrepresentations about the Deuterocanon to your order absolutely free. Get your free ebook today. Order your copy of Why Catholic Bibles Are Bigger by logging on to our online shop at shop.catholic.com.
Wouldn't it be great to have a book to give to anyone to explain exactly why Catholics believe what we believe? The good news is that now there is. Why We're Catholic is the groundbreaking resource by apologist Trent Horn. That one book you can hand to anyone as a starting point for helping them find their way into or back to the practice of the Catholic faith. And at $3 a copy when purchased in bulk, it's perfect for parish distribution and any of your adult faith formation needs. Order your copies of Why We're Catholic today by calling 1-888-291-8000, visiting the shop at Catholic.com, or asking for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Call now with your question. 888-318-7884. This is Catholic Answers Live.
Welcome back to Open Forum on Catholic Answers Live. I am Cy Kellett, your host. Jimmy Akin is our guest, and the topic is up to you because we will take any question of a religious, moral, ethical nature, or anything having to do with the Catholic Church. If you're not Catholic, we'd love it if you call. If you are Catholic, we'd also love it if you call 888-318-7884. Let's go to Brian in Peoria, Arizona. Brian, thanks for calling. You are on with Jimmy Akin. Your question, please.
Hi, guys. Thanks for taking my call. Jimmy, I had a question regarding the sin of the high hand that it talks about in Numbers 11, 30 and 31, and also about confession, as it's talked about in Numbers 5, I believe it's 6 and 7. Does that have any relation to how the church looks at mortal sin and confession now?
It doesn't have a direct relation. For people who may not be aware, the Old Testament discusses sinning with a high hand. And what that really means is a deliberate, conscious, knowing, this is a sin and I'm just doing it anyway. That's what sinning with a high hand is, as opposed to sinning inadvertently or committing in the Old Testament. You could commit a ritual infraction without even being aware that you had done it. And so because there's a difference in the level of deliberation that's involved in these different sins, it's natural for them to be treated in different ways. Obviously, the more deliberately you sin, the worse it is, as opposed to, if you do something without even realizing it, even though it's objectively bad, or if you did it under like the compulsion of strong feelings or something, it's not as bad as if you just knowingly and deliberately say, this is evil and I'm going to do it anyway. And so in the Old Testament, what it says is that basically, if you sin with a high hand, you're going to get punished for it. It says God won't forgive you. But what that means in the Old Testament context is you're just going to have to experience some consequences. In the Old Testament, they didn't have the same orientation towards forgiveness and eternal life that we do. They didn't... you do have references to a life after death in the Old Testament, and late in the Old Testament, you even have references to the resurrection of the dead. But at this early stage in the Pentateuch, where this is being talked about, the overwhelming focus is on this life. And when the Hebrews in this era thought about being forgiven, they understood that not to mean forgiven so I go to heaven. They understood that to mean forgiven so I won't get punished in this life. And so when it says God's not going to forgive people who sin with the high hand, it doesn't mean they're going to hell. It means they're going to experience some consequences in this life for their deliberate active and defiant act of sin. Does that have a relationship to mortal sin and to confession? Well, in an indirect way. Obviously, deliberate consent is one of the conditions that's required for mortal sin today, as we would articulate it. And so you could say a sin with a high hand is one that is the equivalent of a mortal sin. But because we have a broader focus now, where we're not just concerned about what's going to happen in this life, we are concerned about what's going to, principally as Christians, we're concerned in terms of forgiveness of what's going to happen in the next life. We wouldn't say that God's not going to forgive anybody just because they've committed a mortal sin. God absolutely will forgive people who've committed a mortal sin. That's something that is, in fact, one of the principal purposes of the sacrament of confession. It's something the church has always understood. It's something the church has infallibly taught. And so you may experience some consequences as a result of knowingly and deliberately committing a mortal sin. Yeah, there may be some consequences in this life. God may allow you to experience some so that you learn your lesson. But it's not. That's not where our ultimate focus is. He will forgive you, and He will allow you to be with Him in heaven afterwards. Also, we're living in an age of mercy in a way that wasn't necessarily the case in the Old Testament. I mean, God did show mercy, but not in the same way as in the age of mercy that was inaugurated by the coming of His Son. And so, even today, we're going to be a little more circumspect about how much consequences you may experience from a mortal sin. We won't say there's going to be none when you repent and are forgiven of the mortal sin, but also we're not going to insist and say, oh yeah, you definitely will have consequences too. We leave that up to God. So we're a little more cautious about how we would express that today and leave more room for God's discretion and mercy.
Thank you, Brian, for that call. 888-318-7884, our number. Open forum today, both hours. Any question you have on the Catholic faith, we'd be happy to take it. We go now to Gil in Manhattan, New York. Hi, Gil. You are on with Jimmy Akin.
Good evening, Jimmy Akin. I hope you remember me. This is a blind caller that used to call.
I remember you, Gil.
Oh, praise the Lord. And I remember you on the Bible Answer Man, Hank Hanegraaff program.
What can I do for you today?
In Hebrews 13:8, the Bible says Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. Mm-hmm. And in Matthew 26, it says, take this, all of you, and drink from it. This is my body, which will be given up for you. Now, in light of that, how come, since Jesus Christ is the same, we can't get healing today from, let's say, the body of Christ? Well, receiving the Eucharist, in other words.
Well, we can.
Because I have suffered from blindness, and I'm losing my hearing, too.
Well, I'm
so
sorry
it's
to hear
getting
that.
harder for me.
I'm sorry to hear that, and I'd encourage folks to pray for you. We can receive healing through receiving the Eucharist. We can be physically healed in that way. We can certainly pray that Jesus heal us when we receive communion. He hasn't promised to do so. And so we can't count on it happening, but we can certainly ask, and he may choose to do it. We can also show by experience that it seems not to be his will to heal in a miraculous way with necessarily the same frequency that he did in his personal ministry. And we can speculate about why that is. We do have good evidence that miraculous healings still occur today, but not necessarily with the same frequency as they did when Jesus was wandering the countryside conducting a healing ministry. But we certainly have the ability to ask him to heal us when we receive the Eucharist, and we also have the sacrament of the anointing of the sick. whenever we have a serious health issue as another sacrament that he's given us which does have a specific orientation towards healing. And if it's his will and if it would help us with our salvation, then he can and will heal us through it. But we also have to recognize that it's not always his will to heal us. That's something that St. Paul recognized in his own life. St. Paul had various illnesses. He talks to St. Timothy about some frequent stomach ailments that St. Timothy had. And so right there in the apostolic age, it wasn't always God's will for us to experience healing, but sometimes it is, and we can praise him when that happens.
Yes.
Okay.
And you would also say that suffering in our lives is also meant to reflect the glory of God, like Paul says in Romans 5:3, that suffering produces perseverance, perseverance produces character, and character produces hope, and hope does not disappoint us.
It certainly suffering certainly plays a role in spiritual development.
Gil, thanks very, very much for that call. It is open forum today on Catholic Answers Live, and I think we have time to get to another call before we have to take another break. So let's go to Mike in Iowa, listening on 102.7 FM Spirit Catholic Radio. Mike, your question for Jimmy Akin.
Yes, this is Mike. I love listening to your program, and I have an urge to try and convert people to the Catholic faith. So my question is, one of my coworkers stated today that some of the greatest theologians in their mind was St. Thomas Aquinas, Luther, and Jonathan Edwards. How would you respond to that?
I'd say that obviously they each had strong theological minds that allowed them to make a reputation for themselves as theologians that's lasted centuries. That doesn't mean they're right about everything, but we can certainly acknowledge the gifts that they had that enabled them to generate such reputations that have lasted this long. So I'd be inclined to find common ground in that way. I would, if I'm trying to encourage someone to consider the Catholic faith, rather than beating up on Luther or Edwards, I would say, here's something about the Catholic faith that I find really interesting, and that I think you might find interesting too. Here's an issue or some arguments related to an issue that I find particularly compelling, and I thought I'd bring them to your attention.
What do you think of that, Mike?
Well, that sounds like a good approach, yeah.
Okay.
I like it.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Mike. It does seem like we're at maybe a stage historically where Protestants and Catholics can speak to one another maybe more temperately than we have in the past. I don't know if I'm phrasing that correctly.
We're not killing each other anymore for the most part, and that's always a good thing.
Wait, is that always a good thing when Christians are not killing one another?
For the most part, yeah.
For the general, you'd say, yeah.
Yeah. Also, there's, just because someone is coming from a different perspective doesn't mean that we can't learn something from them. All truth is God's truth. Yeah. And St. Thomas Aquinas was a great exponent of this. I mean, he would read, in his age, the writings of Aristotle were coming back into circulation and being publicized. And he would, even though some people or in his age were kind of hinky about this, he would say, no, all truth is God's truth. If Aristotle has some things to say that are true, then we can incorporate those into a Christian framework. Well, that's true even with a pagan like Aristotle. It's also true of fellow Christians who just don't happen to be Catholic. So there are things where a Luther or an Edwards or a Protestant Bible scholar or a Jewish Bible scholar or an Orthodox Bible scholar, if someone's got a valuable insight, then it's God's truth, and we can prudently, like St. Thomas Aquinas did, use and incorporate that insight in a Catholic context.
Right, and Aquinas was so systematic. He didn't tend to be emotional about it. He'd work through the issue, not, this guy's a jerk,
right. The question is truth, not tribe.
Well put. Jimmy Akin is our guest. It is open forum today on Catholic Answers Live, 888-318-7884. Our number, give us a call if you've got a question about the Catholic faith.
You're listening to Catholic Answers Live. The Trump administration rolls back the Health and Human Services contraceptive mandate.
U.S. bishops calling for the total elimination of nuclear weapons.
Pope Francis offers prayers for the victims of the California wildfires.
The U.S. House of Representatives has passed a bill banning abortions after 20 weeks.
And Pope Francis says the death penalty is contrary to the gospel.
Your link to news headlines Catholics count on at the top of the hour. Weekdays on EWTN Radio.
It might be said that anti-Catholic notions of the Church's history are the original fake news. With all the misinformation being spread, where does one look for the truth? In The Real Story of Catholic History, Professor Steve Weidenkopf gives you the facts on over 50 of the most common misconceptions about Catholic history and shows how to answer them simply and powerfully. Whether it's to answer claims about Catholicism's supposedly pagan origins, old myths about the Inquisition that never seem to go away, or more modern errors that anti-Catholics put forth, The Real Story of Catholic History is an essential resource for every Catholic's bookshelf. Order your copy of The Real Story of Catholic History today by calling 1-888-291-8000, visiting the shop at Catholic.com, or asking for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Abortion, the most important issue on the face of the earth, and perhaps the most difficult to discuss. We're afraid it's impolite, or we'll be branded a fanatic, or we'll get tongue-tied. Trent Horn has written a book that could become the go-to resource for anyone wishing to convey the pro-life message. Persuasive Pro-Life from Catholic Answers cuts through the fog of the pro-choice side with real-life examples of how to dialogue about abortion. Order at 888-291-8000 Catholic.com or your Catholic bookstore.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live, Open Forum. Very happy to be back here in the studio after a couple days sick, thanks to Don Johnson and Chris Check, who filled in while I was away. I don't like it when Don Johnson fills in. It makes me nervous because he does a good job.
The guy from Miami Vice?
But no, not the other Don Johnson, the Catholic Radio Don Johnson.
Okay.
I'm always wary of Don because he does such a fine job. With Chris Check, I don't worry because I know that he's the president. There's no way.
He has other things he's doing.
He's too busy. I do want to remind people.
We love you, Si. Don't worry about it.
Oh, thank goodness, Jimmy. Thank you very much for saying that. Both Don and Chris pointed this out. I want to point it out myself. January is Sanctity of Life Month. There'll be marches for life happening all over the country. Maybe here in San Diego. I got to find out. It seems to be an every other year thing here in San Diego, but I'll find out. And so for the month of January, Catholic Answers is making Trent Horn's book, Persuasive Pro-Life, How to Talk About Our Culture's Toughest Issue, and his DVD, Making the Case for Life, each available for only $5. That's a savings of over 70%. They still have that $5 flat rate shipping thing going. So just go to Catholic.com or call 888-291-8000 if you would like to get your copy of Persuasive Pro-Life, How to Talk About Our Culture's Toughest Issue, or the DVD, Making the Case for Life, both from Trent Horn for $5 each. Again, shop.catholic.com is the place to go online. Jimmy, I'm monitoring Facebook closely today.
Okay.
And I'm going to Amponsa. Sorry, it took me a second to get. I want to make sure I got the pronunciation right. Amponsa asks this, please. This issue of Jesus' existence, are there any records of contemporary history that support his historical existence apart from the one given by Josephus? Because Josephus' case is only after the death of Jesus, and Josephus was even born years after the death of Jesus. Please, any explanation, I dearly appeal. So what about the historical sources?
Okay, so, well, there are the Gospels, and one of them for sure was written by an eyewitness. I mean, John's Gospel is very frank about the fact it was written by an eyewitness. Now, it was written after his death and resurrection and ascension, but it's eyewitness testimony. So just because it's coming from a Christian perspective doesn't mean you write it off. I mean, if you had, let's say, a partisan of Abraham Lincoln, after he was assassinated, write a biography of Abraham Lincoln, you don't write it off and say, oh, Abraham Lincoln never existed. This guy, is some Union sympathizer. We don't listen to anything he has to say. Right. That's ridiculous. No historian proceeds that way.
Right.
And so actually, the Gospels, even though at least one, and I would argue two with Matthew, were written by eyewitnesses, even with Mark and Luke, who are kind of second-generation authors, they're relying on eyewitness testimony. Mark is based on Peter's eyewitness testimony and the eyewitness testimony of some other people, and so is Luke. And if you want to read about that, there's a really great book called Jesus and the Eyewitnesses by a British author named Richard Bauckham, Bauckham, Richard Bauckham. Really good. They just came out, incidentally, with a new edition of Jesus and the Eyewitnesses that has like 3 extra chapters, and I've read them, and they're really great. So highly recommend that book. So I would say we've got really good historical evidence, and not just in the form of the Gospels. I mean, St. Paul is writing. He's going around founding churches, talking to people about Jesus. This didn't come out of nowhere, you know. And I've written before. And now, what we would not expect to survive are like census records and things like that from Jesus' time when he was alive, or arrest records or things like that, because we don't have that for anybody from this period. The records have they would make copies of these things, but they didn't make enough copies to survive the ages, because what would happen, especially in parts of the world that are humid, like most of the world, the writing materials they had would deteriorate with age. And so that's why we find like caches of documents in the desert in Egypt where it's dry, but we don't find big caches of papyrus documents or parchment documents in the Greek islands where it's wet. And so typically the only writings we find in those places or Israel, would be like clay and stone and metal artifacts. But that's not what they wrote arrest records and birth certificates on.
Yeah, right.
And so as a result, the records that would have been kept at the time have all perished. We wouldn't expect to have them for Jesus, just like we don't have them for other people. We know about other people, say, who were executed by the Roman state, but we don't have their arrest records in the Roman archives. We don't have their birth certificates, but we know they existed because historical sources talk about them after they had been executed, after they'd become famous and done something worth executing them over. So if you just apply the same historical tests to Jesus' case that you would to any of these others, it's abundantly clear that he existed. I've written about this before. I'm trying to think what some good search terms would be. It's on my website, jimmyakin.com. But if you go there and you use the search field and type in Jesus exists, or even if you just Google Jesus exists, Jimmy Akin, you'll come up with some stuff I've written where I take a kind of indirect approach rather than relying exclusively on documents that talk about Jesus. I talk about the growth of the church, and I document how the church grew really rapidly, and just within the space of a few decades, it went to nothing to all over the Greco-Roman world.
Yeah.
And the only way that happens in an age before the internets and before mass communication and before travel of the kind we have today is if you really make an effort to spread the faith. And that requires organization. So where did the early Christian movement get its organization? Who is it led by? How did it get organized? What did the Christians have to say for themselves? And you can construct an argument just based on the growth of the church that points to the existence of a charismatic founder for this organization that gave it this missionary impulse to go out and do this really hard thing of spreading itself all over the world before mass communication and mass transit. And when you realize that the evidence points to some original charismatic founder who had a missionary drive that he gave the church, then there's just no reason not to take the early Christian leaders at their word that his name happened to be Jesus.
Ann Ponsah, thanks very much for that question. I always find, Jimmy, the argument that, well, Jesus is not a clearly established historical figure, or even the argument that people will go so far as to say there never was a Jesus, to be among the weakest and least reasonable of the anti-Jesus arguments.
Oh, yeah. Even among scholars, biblical scholars who have no Christian faith whatsoever, who are atheists, I mean, there's virtually no traction for the Jesus mythicist movement. I mean, there are a few people here and there that claim this, but not scholars of standing, and there's virtually no traction about this. If someone wants to read more about that, there's a Protestant scholar named Larry Hurtado, Hurtado, and he has a blog. So if you Google Larry Hurtado, he's a really good scholar of early Christianity, and he's lately on his blog been kind of jousting with some Jesus mythicist people, and so you might want to check him out.
Larry Hurtado.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. 888-318-7884, the number. It is open forum today, so if maybe you have a question that's been bugging you about the Catholic Church. Why do Catholics believe that? Why do Catholics do that? Give us a call, 888-318-7884. We'll do our very best to clear it up. Jimmy Akin is our guest. He's senior apologist here at Catholic Answers. And also, you said jimmyakin.com is the place where but you can find his writing all over the place, all over the internets. I like the plural, the internets.
Or the interwebs.
The interwebs. Let's go now to a caller, Misty in Bloomfield, Indiana, listening on the TuneIn app. You are on with Jimmy Akin. Misty, your question.
Hi, guys. First of all, happy early 20th to you.
Oh, you're the first. Thank you.
Indeed, and glad to see you back, Si. Actually, before I get to my question, if I may very briefly be permitted to respond to an earlier caller.
Actually, we really don't do that because we can't screen what you're saying, and then it might put me in the position of having to politely correct you in front of tens of thousands of people.
Okay.
So we try to avoid that.
Okay, I'm sorry. All right, so my question is, and I think, Jimmy, you have done a podcast on this, if I'm correct. My question is, if our first parents were originally vegetarian in the Garden of Eden, even though God later allowed us to consume meat, obviously after the fall, after the Noahic flood, is being a vegetarian actually the ideal state of diet for the Christian, or is there really no difference, and why or why not?
Okay, so this question can be answered along a couple of lines. The first one is the New Testament is really clear about the fact that Jesus declared all foods clean. Mark chapter 7, all foods are clean, they can all be eaten, they can all be received with thanksgiving. In Acts chapter 10, in a vision, God tells Peter not to call anything that he has created unclean. Paul talks about the fact that God made all these things for us to receive them with thanksgiving. So there is no ideal in terms of religious reasons today. Now, is there an ideal in terms of health reasons? Sure. Our bodies operate better with certain combinations of macronutrients and micronutrients than others. Different people have different dietary needs. They have different health conditions that may need different things. And so there's a lot of variability in terms of what it's good for us to consume. And it's not the same for every person, and it's not the same for every person at every moment in their lives. So when it comes to what's the ideal diet in that sense, the church would defer to science and say this isn't a religious matter, it's a health matter, and that puts it in the domain of science. So once we eventually develop good dietary science, which we really haven't done yet, that's what you'd want to look to help tell you what the ideal diet for you at this moment in your life will be. Having said that, since you raised it in terms of vegetarianism, there are people who think vegetarianism is somehow ideal for us today, but there are counter-arguments to that which are quite significant. In fact, if you want to lead an all-vegetarian lifestyle, it's possible, but there are certain nutrients that we get from meat that are very hard to get from exclusively plant sources. And so that's a pointer that a purely vegetarian diet, unless you take special precautions and really are careful about where you're getting certain nutrients, is probably not the ideal for most people in most situations. But again, that's going to be a matter of science. That's not a matter of religion. In terms of what do we do with the biblical text in Genesis, this portion of Genesis, both the portion where God gives Adam and Eve the right to eat of the different fruits in the Garden of Eden, except for the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and later at the flood, where he gives Noah and his family the right to eat meat as well. These are within the primordial history in Genesis 1 through 11. And scholars have long recognized that the genre in this part of Genesis is not history in the sense that later portions of Genesis and the other books of the Old Testament are. This is something, for example, Pope Pius XII talked about in his encyclical Divino Afflante Spiritu, that it's not history in the same way as history later came to be written. It has historical elements, but they're presented in a way that's different. And that means we have to raise a question about to what extent should we press the details of when the permissions to give different foods are given to mankind? One of the things you note when you read this early portion of Genesis is that Adam is made the gardener of Eden, and he's then allowed to eat the fruits of the garden. So he's allowed to benefit from his labor. And then Noah, at the time of the flood, is entrusted with caring for all of the animal life. And then as a result of that, he's given the right to eat the fruit of his labor. He's allowed to eat meat. And so we have to ask a question, does this really mean that humans were originally vegetarian? Well, that's not suggested by the archaeological record, which indicates that we've been meat eaters for as long as we've been here. Maybe Genesis is just making the broader point that whatever job you have, whatever task God has given you to do in this life, you have the right to benefit from the result of your labor. If you're a farmer, you get to eat the plants you cultivate. If you're a gamekeeper, you get to eat the animals you cultivate. Man has a right from God to benefit from the labor that God has given him.
Misty, we got to take a break, so I will have to say thank you for that call. We do appreciate it. It is open forum today on Catholic Answers Live. Our number, 888-31-TRUTH. We'll be right back with more Jimmy Akin on Catholic Answers Live right after this.
Catholic Answers Live with Jimmy Akin is coming right back.
January is Pro-Life Month, and to get as many people as we can involved in the pro-life cause, we're making Trent Horn's book, Persuasive Pro-Life, available for just $5 a copy. That's a savings of over 70%. This book was made specifically with you in mind, to help you engage in sustained and meaningful dialogue, and to give you the tools you need to change people's hearts and minds, so that together we might build up a pro-life culture, one person, one conversation at a time. To get your copies of the book Persuasive Pro-Life for just $5 each, call 1-888-291-8000 or visit the shop at Catholic.com.
Whatever I have learned, writes Catholic Answers founder Karl Keating, I have learned from the masters of the craft. In his new book, Booked for Life, a bibliographic memoir of an accidental apologist, Karl gives future generations a roadmap of what it takes and what it means to become a Catholic apologist. In the way only Karl can, he recounts numerous real-life situations he has encountered in his long career that illustrate the apologetic lessons he's learned. Then, drawing on a lifetime of experience, Karl reveals the books that helped him learn to defend the Catholic faith. Order your copy of Booked for Life today by calling 1-888-291-8000, logging on to the shop at Catholic.com, or asking for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you. Did the Catholic Church add books to the Bible? Or did Protestants remove 7 books from the Old Testament? In Why Catholic Bibles Are Bigger, author Gary Machuda takes you on a fact-filled tour through the history of the Bible, revealing the whole story behind the lost books of the Protestant Old Testament. With the latest information, discourse on crucial issues, and a topical index, Why Catholic Bibles Are Bigger is a book that belongs in the library of every serious student of Scripture. Order your copy of Why Catholic Bibles Are Bigger today by calling 1-888-291-8000, visiting the shop at Catholic.com, or asking for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Call now with your question. 888-318-7884. This is Catholic Answers Live.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I'm just so happy to be here. I really missed being here while I was sick. It was very...
We missed you.
Oh, thank you, Jimmy. I really did miss the place. And Don does a great job, and Chris Check does a fairly reasonable job. No, he does a great job, but I just I want to be here in front of this microphone. Jimmy Akin is our guest this hour. Jimmy Akin, senior apologist here at Catholic Answers and the author of many things, including A Daily Defense, 365 Days plus one to Becoming a Better Apologist. And our topic this hour, whatever is on your mind. If you have a question about the Catholic faith, our Catholic life, what we do, what we avoid, why we do those things, why we avoid them, they're all welcome. 888-318-7884. Haven't had too many folks call who are expressly not Catholic today, so I want to stress, if you're listening and you are not a Catholic, your call is very, very welcome. 888-318-7884. Let's go to Jared in Alabama, listening on the Catholic Answers app. Thanks for downloading the app, Jared. Your question for Jimmy Akin.
Yes, thanks for taking my call. Speaking about people who are not Catholic, I'm not Catholic, so
welcome.
I'm a Protestant. And, I'm a Protestant. I grew up Baptist, and I've been researching the Catholic and Orthodox faith right now, and trying to decide which one is the church founded by Christ. And one of the things that is kind of ringing it as an issue for me is the atonement and how the Catholics understand the atonement. And I've read some Orthodox apologetics talking about basically they advocate for the Christus Victor position. Jesus just came to defeat death. And so basically the book that I was reading was basically arguing that the Catholics kind of distorted that and made it, really legalized, I guess you could say. And so I guess I was wondering, how do the Catholics really understand the atonement, and how would you respond to the accusation that the Catholics have just added to the understanding of the atonement by making it just overly legalized?
Well, I would say that anyone who is making claims like that is going to have a hard time documenting them in church teaching, because I've made a special study of the way the atonement is conceptualized in church teaching as opposed to just what individual theologians may say. And when you look at what the church actually teaches, it doesn't have a single model for how the atonement works. The atonement is a rich event. It's something that goes beyond our ability to fully comprehend. It's a theological mystery in the true sense. And consequently, the church hasn't said a whole lot on a doctrinal level about how it works. It's told us what some of the effects of it are. We're forgiven, we're sanctified, we experience new life and regeneration. So it's talked about the effects of it. It's talked about how it was accomplished. It was accomplished by Jesus on the cross. But in terms of conceptualizing it beyond that, the church really leaves it open to theologians to explore. And so the Christus Victor model is one that Catholics can use, not to the, I would say, nobody should get too exclusive about any one particular model, because it is a rich event. It is a mystery that exceeds our ability to fully understand. And so we don't want to get dogmatic about one particular model. But having said that, there's a lot of flexibility here, and the approach that I tend to take is a complementary model where I see value in different respects in multiple different models of the atonement. The one that I think tends to be primary, and this is just my personal opinion, but the one I think tends to be primary is the model of sacrifice, because that's the one we see stressed in the New Testament. We see Christ depicted as our Passover lamb and as our high priest who's also our victim. And there are a bunch of passages in the New Testament that stress that. There are also passages in the New Testament that stress the model of Christ as the victor who triumphs over the powers of darkness and leads them in his train and so forth, which is a kind of reference to the way, for example, the Romans would have captives brought in a procession during a military triumph after a great victory. So you do have that element as well, but based on my study, the New Testament seems to present the sacrifice model as the primary one, but then these other models also play a contributing role in helping flesh out our understanding of the richness of what Christ did for us on the cross.
Jared? No?
Yes.
Oh.
Yeah, that sounds good. All
right.
Yeah, I was just wondering about that. They bring up, different examples like Anselm of Canterbury with the honor theory and things like that, and penal substitution. And I just didn't know, how the church taught on those issues.
Yeah. Now, penal substitution is one that's more common in Protestant circles. Actually, the idea that God punished Jesus instead of us. Most Catholic scholars have had a problem with that one in particular. It's acknowledged that Jesus did something in which he suffered, and that brought benefit to us. But in terms of did God literally punish Jesus when he should have punished us because of our guilt, that's one that Catholics have generally stayed away from. But in terms of what's permitted, there's a wide range of latitude here.
Jared, thanks very much for that call. 888-31-TRUTH is our number, and we're going to do a whole hour after this. So if you're on the line, stay on the line. Don't go anywhere. If you haven't called and you'd like to ask a question about the Catholic faith, 888-318-7884 is the number. Jimmy, before the break, I want to get to a question from Alan here in the studio visiting us from San Francisco. If someone was selling sacraments such as holy orders for personal gain, would these be invalid orders?
No. They would be simoniacal. They'd involve the crime of simony, which is based on a passage in Acts chapter 8 where Simon Magus is trying to buy the power to confer confirmation.
Right.
So they would be simoniacal, but they wouldn't be invalid as a result.
So I guess that this refers in part, Alan, to the time when there was a lot of corruption in the church, in the hierarchy of the church. So people were buying and selling bishoprics and all that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So those are crimes to do those things, but that doesn't invalidate them. Someone wants to be a bishop, and another bishop ordains him bishop.
Right. It doesn't stop the sacrament from being valid. What's required for validity is that a sacrament be celebrated with the proper form, the proper matter, and the proper intent. But the intent that's required is the intent to confer the sacrament, the intent to do what the church does.
Right.
Doesn't mean you got to have a pure heart when you're doing it.
Right,
if
right,
you did, then any time a priest or anybody was not in a state of grace, they couldn't confer a sacrament, and that would result in disaster. So we know that
then we'd never know if we had received
you never
a
know.
valid sacrament.
So you can be in a state of sin and still confer or receive a sacrament validly.
Alan, thanks for visiting us from San Francisco. If you're out there and you'd like to visit, we're here in El Cajon, and we love to have visitors while we're doing the show. Jimmy Akin is our guest next hour. You're really going to like this Jimmy Akin guy. We'll bring him in here. We'll do a whole...
I've heard about him.
Yeah, I hope you've heard good things.
A little bit.
And it is open forum for another hour. So if you've got a question about the Catholic faith, whether you are Catholic or not, give us a call, 888-318-7884. We'll do our very best to get to your question when we come back right after this on Catholic Answers Live. Hey, Happy New Year. Nick is back, and he has this magical skill where he can put our voices through to Facebook and YouTube and Periscope while the networks...
so this is the secret part of the show that not everybody gets.
Right, this is the top secret part. It's like the secret menu at In-N-Out, where I don't think that menu at In-N-Out is all that secret. However, for those of you who don't know about In-N-Out, In-N-Out is a very popular burger place here in the West, and you can go in there and you say these words like animal style, and then they give it to you animal style. And there's other ones. I don't know all of them. I love animal style. Animal styles,
like mustard and onions.
Mustard, grilled onions, and there's probably something else that goes with it.
Yeah. But for the flip side of that is that's not what you see on their menu. When you go to In-N-Out Burger, their menu is extremely simple.
Right.
It's like burger, cheeseburger, fries, shake.
Right.
Very few options. It's not like where you go into a McDonald's or a Burger King and there's a bazillion options. In-N-Out has deliberately kept its menu simple so that you don't have option overload.
Right.
But if you then know about the quote-unquote secret options, you can still ask for them.
Yeah, right. And I think if you go to their website or something, they list them. They're very explicit on the website. I looked this up one time. Where they're not trying to keep a secret from anybody. They're not trying. This is their business model. Very simple.
They're trying
menu.
to help customers.
Yeah.
I mean, I have this problem when I go. I don't eat at fast food restaurants a lot, but often when I go to restaurants, whether they're fast food or otherwise, it's like option overload. And I don't. It takes me forever. It's frustrating as an experience to decide what I want.
Can I tell you about this? They also, the other day I went to a Burger King. I wanted a chicken sandwich. It's not just that they have millions of options, but now they're on screens that change every 10 seconds. I'm sorry, I'm not that fast. I'm older now, I guess. I don't know. So I'm looking at I look at the little calorie options and the price and all that. So I'm trying to figure out and then it'll change. It'll show up on another screen. So I'm over on this screen, and then it'll change. It's impossible to order at Burger King. Don't go.
They'll eventually, find a way to direct that to your phone so you're in control of it.
Oh yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point.
They probably already have that, but they want you to download their app for it.
Yeah. So, anyways, I don't know if were there any questions on Facebook or anything that you wanted to get to while we're?
Happy to be of what service I can.
Somebody wanted to know about the religious aspects of martial arts. I'm sorry that I didn't grab the question clearly, but it does seem like some of the martial art, even when you watch the martial arts movies. There's a religious component to it.
Like if you're Iron Fist, you're summoning your
chi. Yeah, right. Oh man, that Iron Fist was so bad. The miniseries.
I haven't seen it.
I
heard it wasn't that great.
No, but I like Jessica Jones. But
what I would say about martial arts is this: if you're in a situation and it's being presented to you in like religious terms where you're supposed to be moving life force around or something like that, I would say that's just superstition. And there could be situations where I'd back off from a particular instructor or dojo and say this is going into areas that I'm not comfortable with.
Okay.
But as long as you're clear and that you don't think there's anything religious happening here, this is just a form of physical discipline, then by all means, it's not a problem. So just as long as you're clear on that and you're not leading anybody else into thinking that there's some religious thing happening here, that you're not giving scandal to others.
Right.
So by all means, learn Taekwondo Leap so you can start trashing bozos or whatever. It's a reference to an obscure Canadian comedy sketch.
I wanted to say hi to Donna, who said hi on Facebook. She also said she's never seen anything Star Wars. I think you have about 30 seconds. Any comments on the fact that Donna has never seen anything Star Wars?
She's a member of a very select group.
It is a very select group. Yeah, I saw the new movie.
Oh, what did you think?
Finally got around to seeing it. We got to go. Sorry.
Welcome to Catholic Answers Live, the program where you participate with your questions about apologetics and evangelization, including the most important theological, spiritual, moral, and social issues facing the world today. Call now with your question for today's guest. Toll free 1-888-31-TRUTH. That's 888-318-7884. Now, from San Diego, Catholic Answers Live.
Hello and welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. The last day that Catholic Answers Live will ever be a teenager. Tomorrow the show turns 20. We'll have a big 20th anniversary special edition. I hope you'll join us. We'll have all kinds of fascinating guests. Some of them we are keeping top secret until tomorrow. Hope you'll join us then. This hour is Open Forum on Catholic Answers Live. Open Forum means if you've got a question about the Catholic faith, it doesn't matter who you are or what the question is, we're going to try our best to address it. Just give us a call, 888-318-7884. We're always very grateful when non-Catholics take an interest in the Catholic faith and call to ask a question. You're very welcome, but Catholics are welcome as well, 888-318-7884. Our guest this hour, as he was last hour, is Jimmy Akin, Senior Apologist here at Catholic Answers. Hi, Jimmy.
Hi. So I have a question for you.
Yes.
During the secret part of the show
That's
that not
secret.
everybody gets to
You can't
hear.
talk about the secret part of the show. Okay, I guess you
Just can't disclose it. But if you're watching us
Actually,
on,
I think we should say what the secret part is.
So if you're watching us on like Facebook or YouTube between the hours, we may be able to interact with you there and just have a little bit more discussion and stuff. So during that segment, you were, it's like the secret chairs that we can't talk about, you know.
The secret chairs really are secret. They're here in the studio. No one ever sits in them.
No one ever sits them
and we never use
to
them.
see them.
But yeah.
You said that you'd finally seen the new Star Wars movie, The Last Jedi.
Yeah.
So I was asking, in the process of asking, so what did you think when we had to come back?
Then suddenly we just had to go, and I never got to answer the question.
So what did you think?
I liked it. I liked it. I have to say, of all the Star Wars movies, my favorite is Rogue One.
Okay.
I just think it's such a good movie. And so I didn't think it was like Rogue One. It didn't displace Rogue One.
You like
my
Hamlet,
favorite.
too, I'm betting, of Shakespeare's plays.
Why? No, why?
Everybody dies.
You should not supposed to say that. Now you're giving away secrets you shouldn't give away. Yeah, I do like that part of Hamlet where he says, "What a piece of work is man." I love that little monologue there. But no, I like the comedies like Romeo and Juliet, Macbeth. I like all the the funny light ones.
You know what I liked is the Reduced Shakespeare Company's production of the complete works of William Shakespeare abridged.
Yes.
It's a lot of fun.
I have to say, I was not aware of it until you made me aware of it, and it's absolutely delightful. You should, I don't know how people can see that. Like, is it available online? Do you buy it? Or
I got it on Amazon Instant Video.
Yeah, if you like Shakespeare, and if you don't like Shakespeare, either way.
It's hilarious anyway.
There's two kinds of people in this world. People who like Shakespeare and people who have never seen Shakespeare. Open forum today on. Well, what did you think of the new Star Wars movie?
I thought it was. I liked it too. It wasn't perfect. I had some criticisms of it. In particular, I thought the recurring leitmotif of brash male character needing to be restrained by wise female character was a little over the top. But in terms of the basic story choices they made, they did some things that you wouldn't expect in a Star Wars movie.
Yeah.
And they took some risks, and I thought that was okay. They need, because if you just recycle what we've seen before, it's gonna get boring real fast.
Right.
I mean, if it's all just predictable, this character is gonna get in a lightsaber battle, and then that's gonna happen. You know, if it's too predictable, it's going to be boring really fast. So Disney needs to find ways to push the Star Wars envelope and make it more diverse. And Rogue One is an example of that. Because Rogue One is the first tragedy. True tragedy in the Star Wars universe, and on the big screen. And so I think from a storytelling perspective, from a writing perspective, which is what interests me, you do need to diversify the emotional palette of colors you get to paint with. And you do need to do some surprising moves that just weren't what everyone was expecting.
Yeah, you're right, and they did do that. It was, I was realizing, however, as you were speaking, because you just what you were saying, in the first movie that the new ones they made, The Force Awakens, I loved the character of Finn, John Boyega.
Yeah.
And there wasn't enough Finn in this movie. I love that guy. John Boyega is a great actor, and that's a great character, Finn. And so
he was in this one a little. Maybe he'll have a stronger role in the next one.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that's the junior characters are going to have to be stronger in the next movie, because now all of the established characters are in a position where they're not going to be able to take lead roles.
I just hope the next movie ends with them blowing up a Death Star and then Ewoks dancing around.
I'm hoping for something a little
Really?
more
You think they'll
envelope
come up with
pushing
some-
there. Yeah.
something
I
better?
wasn't wild about that the first time around.
I can sing the Ewok song. All right, back to calls.
Yub Yub or the other version?
I don't know. You're way more advanced in your knowledge than I am of all things, but certainly including Star Trek and Star Wars. 888-318-7884, our number, 888-31-TRUTH. If you have a question having to do with any religion, including that Force religion. What's that? Is there a name for that religion, that Force religion?
The Jedi faith.
Oh, the Jedi faith. Okay. Dang it. I should have known that.
Your sad devotion to that ancient religion hasn't enabled you to divine the location of the secret rebel base.
Man. Thanks, Tarkin.
I find your lack of faith disturbing. I love that line. That's the best line.
Okay, we could just sit here for this hour and have Jimmy do Star Wars. Now we're done. All right. Well, let's go to Lewis in Brooklyn, New York, listening on the Catholic Answers app. First, Lewis, let me say thank you for downloading the app, and then your question for Jimmy Akin.
Yes, thank you. So basically, my question is kind of similar to the caller before. I've been having a lot of friends and family who are becoming vegans, and basically they're making the claim that animals and humans have the same value in life. So therefore, it's the same way it's immoral to kill a human being, it would be immoral to kill an animal for food. And there's some that don't take that strong of a position where they say, no, there are differences between animals and humans, but the difference only lies in, like, when it comes down to survival. So in the fact that we have the means and the ability to and the technology to choose alternatives, then eating meat would be unnecessary. Therefore, it becomes immoral still in their mind. So I just don't know how to respond to that.
Okay. Well, let me ask a question. So what reasons do the people who, because we got two different groups here, what reasons do the people who say that that animals have the same value as humans, what reasons do they give for that? How do they defend that?
It seems like they don't really have it solid, their real reasons. They just say the same way, like in society we all agree that human beings should not be killed for food. Then we're progressing to a time where we could say we could apply the same rights to animals. It's not really a solid argument, and they seem to contradict themselves, and they go in circles.
Okay.
But that's the best I can summarize what they're saying to me.
So they're not citing like religious reasons for this?
No.
Are they religious people?
One of them, but majority of them, no. No.
Okay. Well,
that's why I kind of want like an answer like outside of like any religious argument. Yeah.
So when you encounter someone who is religious, especially if they're a Jew or a Christian, I would point out that, okay, God commanded the Hebrews to eat the Passover lamb, and Jesus ate the Passover lamb, and Jesus performed at least two great big huge hunting miracles, because both at the beginning of his ministry and at the end of his ministry, he enabled St. Peter and his companions to have two miraculously large catches of fish. Well, fishermen are fish hunters, and so Jesus didn't have a problem hunting animals. In fact, he miraculously helped it happen. So anybody who is coming from a position that would respect Jesus, especially religiously, should recognize that it's legitimate in principle to take animal life and to use animals for our benefit, including eating them. Now, in terms of people who are coming from a non-religious perspective, if they're taking this strong position that says humans and animals are of the same value, then I would want to say, okay, really? Because that's going to lead to some really really difficult situations, if that's what you really believe. I mean, if an ant has the same value as a human being, that means every time you walk across a parking lot and unintentionally step on an ant, you're committing homicide, or the equivalent of homicide. I mean, it may be hymenoptericide, but it's the equivalent of homicide. And so you need to take the same precautions against stepping on an ant that you would need to take against running over a person. And that's going to lead you into a situation very quickly where you're going to have to be really scrupulous and really paranoid, and I suspect you're going to find it unlivable. And that's a sign that we're just not meant to treat ants as if they're the equivalent of human beings. And ants are the least of our problems here because they're not the only animals out there in the world. There are all kinds of one-celled animals and microscopic animals, and you're breathing them in all the time, and they're going down your throat, and they're encountering your immune system, and your immune system is killing them right and left because that's, its job. And so if you want to treat those microorganisms as if they're just as valuable as human beings, you're gonna need to cripple your own immune system and die. So that also would be unlivable. And so I would say that's another sign that we're just not meant to treat every life form as if it's the equivalent of a human being. So if we can agree on that principle, then we can say, okay, well, maybe we need to make some distinctions here. Maybe we don't need to treat microscopic organisms or ants the same way we need to treat, say, gorillas or chimpanzees or dolphins, animals that have more qualities that are human-like, and maybe we need to treat them a little differently. Okay, fine. We can agree on that. I don't want to carve up a gorilla and eat it the same way I'd be willing to carve up a turkey and eat it, or a fish or something like that. I'm not saying it would be wrong for me to do it, but we can acknowledge that, as animals gain cognitive ability and as they gain sensitivity to things, it makes sense to respect that. And that leads to the next position, which was the one saying, okay, if we have the ability to avoid killing animals, then we should. Well, there's an element of truth there. If you don't need to take a life for some reason, then why bother taking it? Now, there's a trade-off here. I suspect that in the future, we're going to be eating lab-grown meat. That really, once they have it perfected to where lab-grown meat, I mean, they're working on it now, but I've suspected for years in the future we're gonna be eating meat that is genuine meat. It's made out of animal cells, but it never came off an animal. It's grown in a pan and is, I don't know, electrically stimulated to give the nerve fibers the right texture or something like that. But we're going to be eating synthetic meat, and at that point, once the quality of synthetic meat comes up to the level of regular meat, and once the price comes down to the price level of regular meat, it'll make all the sense in the world to say, okay, this is just as good, it's just as cheap. This is what I'm going to eat because I don't want to have an animal killed. And a lot of farms that we have now will go away. The same way the horse population is not as great as it used to be before the invention of the automobile. And I suspect the same exact thing is going to happen to the animal husbandry industry. Yeah. It's largely going to vanish. But until that happens, until the quality of artificial meats and the expense of obtaining them is comparable to real meat, there's nothing wrong with eating real meat. And that's true for a lot of people in our society because these alternatives either aren't as good or they don't have the same ratios of nutrients and stuff, or they don't taste as good if you've ever tried some of them, as I have, or they're more expensive. And if that's true, even here in America, it's even more true in other parts of the world. It's just not the case yet that substitute meats are on the same playing field as real meat. And so even though in the future we can agree, sure, this is likely going to happen and it will be a compassionate solution in the future, we're just not there yet. So that's how I'd approach it.
Lewis, thanks very much for the call. We have to go to a break. I do remember, Jimmy, one time hearing a biologist say one of the best things that can happen to an animal species is that humans decide to eat it.
Mm-hmm.
Because if we decide to eat it, its population just skyrockets because we start husbanding them. And
well, and there are entire plant species where its
like
entire survival strategy at this point is be tasty to humans.
Yeah.
And the thing is with plants, they have no problem with that.
Yeah. I'd like to start a policy, though, of not saying the word synthetic meat if I've been sick within a week.
Okay. I'm talking about future meat that is actually good.
I know, I'm just kidding you. Just teasing you, Jimmy Akin. We'll be right back with more Jimmy Akin Open Forum on Catholic Answers Live right after this.
Hello, everyone. This is country music artist Colin Ray. Do what I do and keep it right here on Catholic Answers Live.
January is Pro-Life Month, and to get as many people as we can involved in the pro-life cause, we're making Trent Horn's DVD, Making the Case for Life, available for just $5 a copy. That's a savings of over 70%. This DVD was made specifically with you in mind, to help you engage in sustained and meaningful dialogue, and to give you the tools you need to change people's hearts and minds, so that together we might build up a pro-life culture, one person, one conversation at a time. To get your copy of the DVD, Making the Case for Life, for just $5 a copy, call 1-888-291-8000 or visit the shop at Catholic.com.
Whatever I have learned, writes Catholic Answers founder Carl Keating, I have learned from the masters of the craft. In his new book, Booked for Life, a bibliographic memoir of an accidental apologist, Carl gives future generations a roadmap of what it takes and what it means to become a Catholic apologist. In the way only Carl can, he recounts numerous real-life situations he has encountered in his long career that illustrate the apologetic lessons he's learned. Then, drawing on a lifetime of experience, Carl reveals the books that helped him learn to defend the Catholic faith. Order your copy of Booked for Life today by calling 1-888-291-8000, logging on to the shop at Catholic.com, or asking for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Pope Francis said, "The key that opens the door to faith is prayer." Join St. Paul Street Evangelization by running a prayer station in the public square. You don't need to be a professional apologist or theologian. Just listen to the needs of the people you encounter. Offer encouragement, take prayer requests, and pray with people. Find out more and get involved today at streetevangelization.com. That's streetevangelization.com.
Call now with your question. 888-318-7884. This is Catholic Answers Live.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live, Open Forum. 888-31-TRUTH, our number. If you've got a question about the Catholic faith, we'd love to take it today. Daniela in Mexico watching on Facebook. Thanks for joining us on Facebook. Daniela, your question for Jimmy Akin.
Hi. Okay, so this is my question.
Okay.
Jimmy, what is your take on the monogenism versus polygenism debate? So framed another way, what is the right way for a faithful Catholic to balance science and faith when it comes to the question of our anthropological roots and original sin?
Okay. So I need to start by explaining what those terms mean. Monogenism is the view that at the beginning of the human race, there were literally only two people, Adam and Eve, and that all human beings descend from those two people. Polygenism is the view that at the beginning of the human race, there were more than just two people in the original human breeding population. There may have been two who the Bible records as Adam and Eve, but they weren't the only two, or the Adam and Eve we read about in Scripture could be taken of as symbols of the original human race. And this has been a subject that has been much discussed in recent years, both inside the Catholic community and outside the Catholic community. In 1950, Pope Pius XII issued an encyclical called Humanae Generis, in which he addressed this question. And he said that at that time, that although it was possible for Catholics to hold the theory of evolution, provided certain stipulations were met, like God creates the human soul out of nothing and so forth, that that Catholics did not have the liberty to endorse polygenism because it wasn't clear how to reconcile it with the sources of faith that talk about things like original sin and so forth. Subsequent to that, there has been a lot of discussion of how might one reconcile polygenism with the sources of faith, because biologically, as the biological sciences have advanced and as we've gotten a greater grasp of the amount of genetic diversity in the human race after we cracked the human genome, if you talk to a scientist, they will tell you it looks like we have had some population bottlenecks in the history of the human race, but it never got below a few thousand. And that the idea that there were originally only two humans and that absolutely all the humans in history descended from those two with no additional genetic input, genetic scientists will tell you that's not supported by the evidence. So that's been one of the factors that has led to a discussion of this. Different Orthodox Catholics have different opinions on where the church is on this, because we haven't gotten in recent times a explicit discussion of this in a highly authoritative magisterial document. Personally, I've done a study of this question, and I've tracked very carefully how the magisterium has handled this in subsequent years since 1960, and the trajectory is there in the documents, if you read them very carefully, is one of treating this question progressively more cautiously and allowing various groups to propose ways of reconciling polygenism with the sources of faith. For example, in the German Adult Catechism that the German bishops released in the 1980s, it was reviewed at the Vatican, and the Vatican allowed it to be published. And it says, as long as you maintain these principles, it's possible to reconcile polygenism with the sources of faith. In 2004, there was a document called Communion and Stewardship that was released by the International Theological Commission. Now, that's not a body of the magisterium. It's an advisory body. It's run by the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, and it's headed by the prefect of the Congregation of the Doctrine of the Faith. He's the president of the International Theological Commission. At the time, that was Joseph Ratzinger. And in Communion and Stewardship, it discusses, without deciding between, different options for how the human race may have emerged as out of Africa, so many thousand years ago, and how the human race may have started either as individuals or populations, and it doesn't decide between those two. And the documents of the International Theological Commission can only be published, which this one was, on the condition that the magisterium does not have any difficulty with what it says. That's in its bylaws. And so when Joseph Ratzinger certified this document for publication, he was thereby certifying that the magisterium didn't have a problem with what this document said. And so the way I look at that is the magisterium is presently allowing Catholics to take different positions on this. It's no longer the case that they don't have the liberty to explore this and hold this position. Now the church is at least allowing that to happen as these different cases illustrate, and there's more than what I just named. I can't go into them all, but those are two examples where the magisterium has taken a different tack on this issue more recently than it did in 1950. So I would say, in terms of what should Catholics believe, I would say they should believe that the sources of faith are true, and they should be receptive to how the church handles this issue in the future, but they should not be dogmatic about it one way or another right now. That's my view. I should point out there are other people who are also Orthodox Catholics who think the 1950 policy is still in place. And I respect those people. I have to say that in my own study of this subject, which has been a very careful one, I don't find that the evidence supports that, but I understand that, and I think that people need to not get overly insistent about this right now, because there are a lot of things in play, and I expect we'll be hearing more from the magisterium in the future on this subject.
Daniela, thank you very much for that call from Mexico. Thanks very much for your patience in waiting for us to get to you. 888-318-7884 is our number. It is open forum today on Catholic Answers Live. If you've got a question about the faith, if you've got a question about a moral issue, maybe a question about religion more generally, all are welcome. 888-318-7884. We'll be right back after this.
We're ready and waiting for your call today on Catholic Answers Live.
It might be said that anti-Catholic notions of the Church's history are the original fake news. With all the misinformation being spread, where does one look for the truth? In The Real Story of Catholic History, Professor Steve Weidenkopf gives you the facts on over 50 of the most common misconceptions about Catholic history and shows how to answer them simply and powerfully. Whether it's to answer claims about Catholicism's supposedly pagan origins, old myths about the Inquisition that never seem to go away, or more modern errors that anti-Catholics put forth, The Real Story of Catholic History is an essential resource for every Catholic's bookshelf. Order your copy of The Real Story of Catholic History today by calling 1-888-291-8000, visiting the shop at Catholic.com, or asking for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
As the legend goes, the Protestant Reformation began when Martin Luther nailed a list of his grievances with the Catholic Church to the door of All Saints Church in Wittenberg, Germany. But do you know the whole story? In Catholic Answers' brand new documentary, The Protestant Revolution, you will hear from top apologists Tim Staples, Jimmy Akin, Carla Broussard, Trent Horn, and Steve Weidenkopf as they expose the errors of Martin Luther and of the other so-called reformers. This DVD will give you a clearer understanding of our Protestant brothers and sisters, and you will be better equipped to engage them about what separates us and about what unites us. Order your copy of The Protestant Revolution today by calling 1-888-291-8000, visiting shop.catholic.com, or by asking for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
This is Colleen Kelly Mast of Mast Appeal, pondering the Christmas carol, O Holy Night. My favorite line is, "Long lay the world in sin and error pining, till he appeared and the soul felt its worth." Do you feel your worth? Do you know how much God loves you? God so loved us that he gave his only Son so that we could be saved from our sin and error. So let's rejoice in God's love this Christmas, and let your soul feel its worth.
I like that drumming, Nick, on that number. Who's drumming there? Who's that drumming there? Is that you, Nick Chamberlain? Operating the board and playing the drums at the same time.
That's the Groovy Thursday music. And I talked to Nick earlier. He's going to get me a copy of that so I can use it to call dances to.
Nice.
I off the top of my head, I mean, because regardless of the musical structure of it, I know by listening to it, I can use that as a square dance hoedown. Where the choreography is extemporaneous, and I just keep calling until I decide to stop. But I'm hoping that maybe I can convince Nick and his group to give me a 64 count version of it that I could use to write dances to specifically go to in other forms.
Someone's going to snap an ankle. Someone's going to snap an ankle trying to square dance to something that.
Oh, no.
No,
that's
really?
Fine, no. I don't know what the exact beats per minute on that are, but people...
It's about 1 million. I think it's right around in the area of 1 million. That's a pretty groovy tune, Nick. Are you proud of it?
Sounds like it's maybe in the 120s or 130s, which is really good square dancing speed.
Yeah, you know what? When we're talking about a tune, maybe you could just keep playing it underneath. Like what the bed just went away, you just disappeared. But now people have to go from their memory about how groovy it is. But
Yeah,
every
when
Thursday,
when you're watching a movie, they keep the soundtrack going
I
while
know.
the characters are talking.
But
and
it's
stuff.
hard for Nick to operate the board and play the drums at the same time.
That's true.
And eat his carrot with it. He's in there eating.
Yeah.
while
You
we're
could use the
doing
carrot
this.
as a drumstick. That would simplify a little bit.
Yeah, I love that Thursday song though, Nick. Love that.
Does
Thursday
it have
song.
a name?
It's called Well, he can't even think of the name of his own
He'll
song.
let us know.
That's Nick Check and the Dead Century playing that song with Nick Chamberlain on the drums, and I'm feeling like a DJ. So let's go to Taylor in Manteca, California, watching on YouTube. Thanks for watching on YouTube, Taylor. Your question for Jimmy Akin.
Lard.
Huh?
Yeah, hey, thanks, guys. So my question is regarding our certainty. What kind of certainty can we have about the present state of our souls? And the Council of Trent says we can't know with a certainty of faith that can't be subject to error.
Right.
But then the Catechism says we can't rely on our feelings or works to conclude we're justified, but through a reflection of God's blessings in our lives, we can have a guarantee that grace is at work in us. So I'm a little confused. I know 1 John says that we can know, and Catholics usually point to Joan of Arc's statement, and so I'm just wondering, about she didn't know.
So in terms of grades of certitude, the highest is the certitude of faith that doesn't admit of error. And Trent says that we can't have that kind of certitude regarding the state of our soul apart from, special revelation. But any other level is something we can theoretically have. So the next level below that people usually talk about is what's called moral certitude. And a moral certitude is one where, although we have to admit there's a remote possibility we could be wrong, we have sufficient evidence that we can be certain of it, not absolutely, but morally, so that we don't need to worry about the possibility of being wrong. And lots of things fall into the category of moral certitude, like you can be morally certain your wife is not deliberately poisoning you, or you can be morally certain that this earth is not going to go spinning off its axis tonight while you're asleep and have us all perish in space. There are lots of things that, although hypothetically they're possible, we don't need to be worrying about them. And so the Church has recognized that that kind of certitude is possible. Doesn't mean it's justified for everybody. If you're engaging in sinful patterns of behavior, you may not have that level of certainty be justified for you. Also, some people, have there's a possibility of self-deception, and so if you're using a sloppy reasoning process that's telling you, oh yeah, I have nothing to worry about because I believed in Jesus when I was 6 years old, and therefore I'm forever saved no matter what I do. Well, you're using some faulty data in your reasoning process, because just because you believed in Jesus when you were 6 doesn't mean that you're unable to commit mortal sin and fall from grace, in St. Paul's words. And so even though you may subjectively feel very certain of your salvation, it's not actually supported by good evidence. But if you have good evidence and you're using good reasoning, and the evidence points strongly in favor of you being in a state of grace, then you can arrive at a level of moral certitude where you don't need to worry about it. And that's part of the point of the passages in the New Testament, especially in John's writings, where he talks about, I've written this so that you may know that you have eternal life. When he says no, he's talking about moral certitude. He's not talking about infallible certitude. The word know gets used like certitude with a spectrum of different meanings. And if you are applying in philosophy, like if you're a fan of René Descartes, if you really want to know what's infallibly what you know infallibly, it's a very small number of things, like I think therefore I am. Maybe you know that infallibly. But most things that we say we know, like I know Psychelid, or I know I'm on the radio, or I know it's dark outside. I don't know those with infallible certitude, but I do know them with moral certitude, and thus I'm entitled to say that I know them in that way. And in the same way, we can know that we have eternal life if we meet the qualifications that Scripture lays out for us knowing that.
Taylor?
Yeah. Thank you for the response, Jimmy.
No problem. By the way, I love the name of your town, Manteca.
And I think you guys pronounce it Manteca, right?
Yeah.
But that's because you're in
Oh,
Northern
like
California.
lard.
See, in Southern California, we pronounce everything the proper Spanish way.
But here on the screen, it's spelled, it may be spelled differently up there, but here it's spelled like the Spanish word for lard, which is actually a really good flavoring agent and a healthy form of fat. So,
thank you, Jimmy. I noticed that's a definite distinction between Northern Californians and Southern Californians. Is certain names like Paso Robles. That's what in Southern California we call that Paso Robles,
yeah.
but they call it Paso Robles.
Interesting. And it's kind of like Palestine, Texas.
And some would say Palestine, right.
Or Lavaca, Arkansas.
All right, or La Jolla, California.
Nobody says La Jolla.
People do say La Jolla. They're not correct.
Natives.
And then some people get really uptight about Nevada. But if people who, I'm sorry to say this, but people who actually grew up in Nevada, they don't care.
Yeah.
It's the people who moved there,
right,
that want you to say Nevada. We've been. Are we off the air now in Nevada? We just went off the air in Nevada.
Well, and for anyone who's wondering, it's La Jolla, not La Jolla.
It looks like La Jolla. 888-318-7884. That's our pronunciation minute. And that's going to be a new feature here on Catholic Answers. Hope you enjoy it. We now go to Mark in Indianapolis, Indiana, listening on EWTN. Your question for Jimmy Akin, Mark.
So in Indianapolis, north of us, we have Carmel.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and
we
people
have
want to
sales on the Versailles and Carmel.
Oh,
anyway, so it was suggested to me that I not read the theology of the body, but get the theology of the body in simplified language. So I went through it, and one thing struck me. So male and female made complementary. They have natural attraction, made in the image of Jesus and God and the Holy Spirit, and that kind of union together. The thing that struck me toward the end of this simplified version was that when our souls are united with our bodies in heaven, we will still retain male and female. Of course, there's no procreation required at that point,
right.
But there was no explanation about what then. And so obviously I need to go research some more, unless Jimmy can tell me what's going on in heaven. Is it like the joy of union we feel in marital bliss in heaven, period? But why male and female still?
The male and female aspect is something that's intrinsic to who we are when we're created. We're, by God's design, we are human beings, and human beings are creatures that innately have gender. So we're either male or female. In some unusual cases, it can be hard, in cases of certain birth abnormalities and so forth, it can be hard to tell which is the case, but it doesn't change the fact that this is the way our species is created by God. And in the resurrection, we're not going to change species. We're still going to be humans. It's not like we become angels or something. That's an idea you get in some fiction, like It's a Wonderful Life, but we're always going to be human beings. And as a result of being always human beings and a result of always being the same people we are now, even if we're in an upgraded form, we're still going to continue to have gender, which is intrinsic to our identity as humans. So doesn't mean we're always going to be using the associated anatomy, just like we're not always using the associated anatomy even in this life. I mean, it has certain specific functions, and we're not engaged in those functions even most of the time. So that anatomy gets used on an as-needed basis. And in the next life, because, among other things, procreation won't be necessary to maintain the race because we're all going to be immortal, we won't be using the anatomy for its reproductive purpose. And there are even hints we may not be using it for its other purposes either. So so it will be a very different state than what we're in right now. It'll be a much better state. The marital embrace is a pointer towards what the glory of heaven will be like. It's not actually as good as heaven. Heaven will be even better. But heaven also won't have the procreative orientation that the marital embrace does, and so we shouldn't expect it to feel like that necessarily. C.S. Lewis has a famous example in talking about this, about some people have trouble imagining how can heaven be perfect if we're not going to be having sex. Well, he uses an analogy of imagining little boys for whom the highest pleasure in life is eating chocolates.
Yeah.
And it's like hard to imagine how can anything be more pleasurable than eating chocolates. Well, guess what? The marital embrace is. And you're not going to care about the eating chocolates when you have the marital embrace. And in the same way, you're not going to care about the marital embrace when you have heaven. But also notice, the marital embrace does not feel like eating chocolates. And so we shouldn't expect heaven to feel like the marital embrace. It's just going to be way better.
Mark, thanks for the call. It seems like nothing is better than heaven.
Yeah, nothing is better than heaven.
Okay, I'm glad we were able to clear up that theological subtlety. Mark,
you know why?
Because God
is the best thing there is. So there's nothing better than God.
All right, God
and
is
heaven
good.
is union with God.
Man, you know,
it all fits together.
Yeah, it does fit together, and it's very enticing. It makes you feel very enthusiastic for the future when you think about that. 888-31-TRUTH is our number. Open forum is our topic. That means whatever you've got on your mind about the life, the faith, the history of the Catholic Church is more than welcome. We'll take up more of those calls when we come back after this on Catholic Answers Live.
We're glad you're with us. Stick around for more Catholic Answers Live.
January is Pro-Life Month, and to get as many people as we can involved in the pro-life cause, we're making Trent Horn's book, Persuasive Pro-Life, and his DVD, Making the Case for Life, available for just $5 each. That's a savings of over 70%. Both the book and the DVD were made specifically with you in mind, to help you engage in sustained and meaningful dialogue, and to give you the tools you need to change people's hearts and minds, so that together we might build up a pro-life culture, one person, one conversation at a time. To get your copies of the book Persuasive Pro-Life or the DVD Making the Case for Life for just $5 each, just call 1-888-291-8000 or visit the shop at Catholic.com.
St. John Paul II stated that, for the disciple of Christ, evangelization is a duty, an obligation of love, and the Catechism of the Catholic Church states that evangelization is necessary for salvation.
So we know we're called, but how do we do it?
St. Paul Street Evangelization can help. To learn more, contact us at streetevangelization.com. That's streetevangelization.com.
Homeschool Connections, an online provider of courses for your Catholic homeschool, is a sponsor of Catholic Answers Live. Homeschool Connections website is homeschoolconnections.com.
Catholic Answers Live is brought to you in part by CatholicSingles.com, the website for Catholics who want to meet others who share their faith and values for faith, fellowship, and love. You can learn more at CatholicSingles.com. Catholic Answers Live thanks CatholicSingles.com for their generous support.
Call now with your question, 888-318-7884. This is Catholic Answers Live.
Jimmy Akin is our guest this hour on Catholic Answers Live. We are coming near to the top of the hour, so we will try to move as quickly and felicitously as we can among the questions. And we start with Jim in Maryland. Jim, your question for Jimmy Akin.
Here I am.
Hi, Jim. You have a question for Jimmy?
You're on the air. What's your question?
I'm wanting a little clarity about our obligation to do penance. I know that as Catholics we're called generally that Fridays are a day of penance, and traditionally that's taken the form of abstaining from meat, and we can choose other forms of penance, and there are exceptions to those days. And I'm a little foggy on what the exceptions are. Is it, the octave of Christmas, the octave of Easter, the entire season of Easter, any day that the church calls a feast, any day that the church calls a solemnity.
Okay, so let me make sure I understand your question. You're wanting to know when are we obliged to abstain from meat? Is that the question?
More generally, when are we obliged to do penance? Let's say.
Okay.
Say that way.
Well, it varies depending on what country you're in, but I can give you the answer for the United States. In the Latin Rite in the United States, you are obliged to abstain from meat on Ash Wednesday and on the Fridays of Lent, including Good Friday, which technically isn't part of Lent, it's part of Triduum, but it's still a day on which you need to do this. So Ash Wednesday, Good Friday, and the Fridays of Lent. In addition, we need to fast, and it's a very limited form of fasting, but we need to fast on Ash Wednesday and Good Friday. All other Fridays of the year are days of penance, but that the U.S. bishops have not created an obligation to select an alternative form of penance on those days. If you read the documents very carefully, and I have, and you can read about this at jimmyakin.com, if you look under popular posts at jimmyakin.com, there's one called Annual Lent Fight. And in the Annual Lent Fight section, it has an extensive treatment of what the documents actually say about this. But basically, back in the 1960s, when the U.S. bishops implemented the current legislation governing this for the United States, they terminated the obligation to abstain from meat on Fridays outside of Lent. And they encouraged and invited people to still do that or do something else, but they didn't create a new independent obligation to do some form of penance. So we're invited to do penance on those days, and liturgically they're days of penance, but we don't have a positive legal obligation to do penance on Fridays outside of Lent. And just like all of the days of Lent are days of penance, but we don't have an obligation to do anything specific on those except on Fridays. So that's a basic sketch of the current state of the law in the United States. Obviously, the law establishes the minimum of what you need to do, but you're certainly welcome to do penance in a greater degree on a greater number of days, but you don't have an obligation to.
Thank you, Jim, for that call. We go now to Michael in Lafayette, Indiana, listening on Facebook. Thanks for joining us on Facebook, Michael. Your question for Jimmy.
Hello, I've enjoyed the discussion today.
Thank you. So have I.
I heard about, great. I heard that G.K. Chesterton, his theology of the pint, the pipe, and the cross. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting to me because he lived during a time when alcohol was illegal, at least in the United States. Mm-hmm. And so my question is, marijuana is becoming increasingly legal in America and in the world in general. Mm-hmm. And so I'm wondering what the Catholic teaching is on recreational marijuana use.
The Catholic Church does not have an official teaching on marijuana use in particular. The Catholic Church doesn't take positions on particular substances like that. What it does have are principles that apply more generally. If you look in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, for example, it's going to condemn the use of narcotics. The question is going to be to what degree does marijuana fall into that category? Now, narcotics is a legal category, and it's not one that it's not one that you can just go to a secular textbook or a secular legal code and say, well, therefore this definition I found here applies to the Catechism, because the Catechism isn't a document coming from a secular legal tradition. So it's gesturing at a general principle, but it's not giving us a specifically cashed out form of it. The way I would approach it is, and I have to confess, I have a lack of experience with marijuana here, so I don't have the data I need to make an assessment. But if I apply the principles of Catholic moral theology here, there's a distinction between what's known as perfect drunkenness or perfect intoxication and imperfect drunkenness or imperfect intoxication. When someone has become so intoxicated they lose their moral faculties, then that, if they're doing it without a good reason, like I'm about to undergo surgery and I need this for extreme pain control, then it's a mortal sin. If they are only imperfectly drunken, so they haven't lost their moral faculties, then it may be a venial sin. Then there are situations where, depending on how you want to classify them, there's very little influence, and there's what you could call moderate or proportional use, which is not a sin at all to use alcohol with. I would suggest the same principles apply to other mind-altering substances, whether it's marijuana or heroin or anything else. If there can be situations, let's take morphine as an example. Morphine is commonly classified as a narcotic, but there are situations where it's okay to take morphine if you're, let's say, in a hospice, and you're dying and you need it for pain control. So that's legitimate, but that's different than recreational use. If we zero in on marijuana, it is not generally viewed as being as potent as morphine or heroin. It might be more like alcohol in that respect. Here's where my own limited experience prevents me from being able to be definitive. I would say if there's a moderate use, then it's potentially not sinful, the same way alcohol can be used moderately, and in those circumstances it's not sinful. If one used marijuana to the extent of it becoming imperfectly intoxicated, so you still had your moral faculties, then that could be venially sinful. If you used it to the extent of becoming perfectly intoxicated, then without an adequate reason like medical pain control, then that would be a mortal sin to do that knowingly and deliberately. So I would apply the same principles elsewhere. I just don't know, does marijuana have a moderate use the way alcohol does, or does it not? That's something that that is going to be a very divisive and politicized question, and I don't have the experience personally to be able to pronounce upon it. So I'll have to leave that open and just sketch the moral principles involved.
Thanks, Michael. We're going to go very quickly now to Angelina in Nebraska, listening on Spirit Catholic Radio. Angelina, you need to phrase your question as quickly as you can because we are very limited on time.
Okay, my question is, after a person dies and winds up in purgatory, are they aware of things that happened prior to their death?
In their own life? Presumably so.
No, to family life. The example that I can give you is a son commits suicide. That information was not told to the mother. The mother dies later. Does she, when she gets to purgatory, find out that the son committed suicide?
We don't know. We don't have specific information about how much knowledge the souls in purgatory have, especially regarding matters that don't directly bear on them. Presumably they're going to have a life review of some sort at the particular judgment that's going to examine what happened in their life, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be privileged to information about what happened in other people's lives. That's something that presumably could come out at the general judgment at the end of time, but it's not certain that it would happen at the particular judgment after an individual dies. So there's no way of knowing that. We just haven't been given enough information to know about that.
Angelina?
Okay, thank you.
Sure thing.
All right, thank you very much, Angelina. Jimmy, how much do we know about what happens in purgatory? It seems to me it's very limited.
Yeah, it really is. There are various stories that are in circulation based on, reports of encountering souls from purgatory. There's a lot of theological speculation. What we do know is that God will give us the holiness we need to be united with Him in heaven. If you go to purgatory, you're guaranteed heaven, and it may be a bit of a bumpy ride, but you're going to get there in the end, and that's the most important thing.
Sounds like good news to me. Jimmy Akin, thanks so much for
My
another
pleasure.
great couple of hours. This is the way when you're sick, come back to work and hang out with Jimmy Akin for 2 hours. That's the way to do it.
Just make sure you're not contagious anymore.
Yeah, well, I did take an extra day to make sure I wasn't, because it's been nasty. A lot of people have been getting sick.
A lot of people in the office. So far, I've avoided it, and I want to maintain that.
Yeah, but you still have to come back tomorrow, Jimmy.
Yep.
Because we're going to do the big super special.
So don't get sick tonight.
20. No, as long as no one discusses artificial or synthetic meat, I think I'm going to be fine. Big super special 20th anniversary show tomorrow with special guests and reminiscences of 20 years on Catholic Answers. We're really looking forward to it. We hope you join us. Until then, we will see you next time, God willing, on Catholic Answers Live.